I strutted into that conference room like I owned the entire star system, because let's be honest, I practically did. My scales gleamed under the sterile lighting of the station, each one polished to perfection, catching the light in ways that screamed superiority. The doors hissed shut behind me with a satisfying finality. This was going to be easy. The Krath Dominion had sent me, Ambassador Vex Thornax, to handle what they called a delicate situation. Delicate. There was nothing delicate about it. These humans had established a mining colony on Kepler-7, a planet we had marked for expansion 3 cycles ago. They needed to leave, simple as that. And I was here to make sure they understood that reality, preferably while groveling. I had negotiated with the Vryn Collective, those tentacled nightmares who could crush starships with their bare appendages. I had stared down the hive queens of Sector 9, whose very presence made most species lose control of their bodily functions. Humans. Please, they were the galaxy's newest members, barely 2 centuries into space travel. Soft little mammals who somehow stumbled into faster-than-light technology and thought that made them special. My 4 eyes scanned the room with practiced disdain. Standard diplomatic setup. Long table, too many chairs, the kind of sterile environment designed to make everyone equally uncomfortable. Neutral territory, they called it. I called it boring. Then I saw her. The human sat at the far end of the table, and my first thought, I am not ashamed to admit, was that someone had sent a child to negotiate with me. She was tiny. Maybe 1.6 meters tall if I was being generous. Her frame looked like it could snap in a light breeze. No scales, no armor plating, no bioweapon sprouting from her shoulders, just pale skin, dark hair pulled back in some sort of functional arrangement, and these absurdly small hands folded on the table in front of her. She wore a uniform, dark blue with some patches and insignia that probably meant something to humans. Military. Maybe. Did it matter? She looked like she weighed less than my left arm. My left arm. Captain Elena Torres, she said, standing up and extending one of those ridiculous little hands toward me. United Earth Coalition, Colonial Defense Corps. Thank you for meeting with me today, Ambassador Vex. I stared at the hand. Was she serious? Did she really expect me to participate in this bizarre human-touching ritual? I had read about it in the briefing files. Handshakes, they called them, some primitive greeting custom left over from their pre-space flight days, supposedly to show you were not carrying weapons. As if hiding a weapon in those tiny appendages was even possible. I ignored the hand completely and settled my bulk into the reinforced chair across from her. It creaked under my weight. Good. Let her hear exactly what a real warrior species sounded like when they sat down. Let us skip the pleasantries, human, I said, making sure my translator carried the full weight of my contempt. My voice rumbled through the chamber, deep and resonant, the kind of sound that made prey species instinctively flee. You are occupying Kepler-7. That planet falls within Krath territorial claims. You have 30 standard days to evacuate your colony, or we will remove you. Forcibly. She lowered her hand slowly, no expression crossing her face. Then she sat back down, those dark eyes never leaving mine. Not all 4 of mine, of course. Humans only had 2 eyes. 2. How they managed to not constantly walk into walls was beyond me. Ambassador, she said, her voice calm, almost bored. Kepler-7 was unclaimed when we arrived 4 years ago. We have established infrastructure, homes, farms. 3,000 people live there now. We are not leaving. I laughed. Actually laughed. The sound echoed off the walls, harsh and sharp. This was going to be even easier than I thought. Not leaving, I repeated, still chuckling. The sound came out like gravel grinding against metal. Oh, that is rich. That is truly magnificent. Did you hear that from your superiors, or did you come up with that bit of comedy on your own? Elena did not react. She just sat there, hands still folded, face completely neutral. It was unsettling in a way I did not want to admit. Most species had tells. The Vryn changed color when agitated. The Selkoth released pheromone. Even the stoic granite folk showed micro-expressions in their crystalline faces. This human. Nothing. Blank as a powered-down monitor. Let me explain something to you, Captain Torres, I said, leaning forward, letting my full 2.8 meters of height cast a shadow across the table. The Krath Dominion has conquered 47 star systems. 47. We have broken species that had been spacefaring for millennia before your ancestors figured out how to make fire. Do you understand what I am telling you? I understand you perfectly, Ambassador, she replied, her voice still maddeningly even. You are threatening military action against a peaceful human colony. Threatening? I slammed one of my clawed hands on the table. The metal buckled slightly under the impact. No. I am not threatening anything. I am explaining reality to you. The Krath are warriors. We have bred for combat for 10,000 generations. Our children fight in arena trials before they can even speak. Our weakest soldiers could tear through your strongest with their bare claws. I gestured at her with one long talon, making sure she got a good look at the serrated edge. Look at you. You are built like prey. Soft skin that tears at the slightest pressure. No natural weapons. No armor. You probably cannot even survive in a standard oxygen-nitrogen atmosphere without climate control. Are you finished? She asked. The audacity. The sheer audacity of this tiny mammal. Finished? My laugh came out as more of a snarl this time. I have barely started, human. Kepler-7 sits on the largest deposit of beryllium ore in this sector. That mineral is worth more than your entire species' gross domestic product. You think we are going to let you keep it because you planted some crops and built a few habitats? You think 3,000 soft, fragile humans are going to stand against the Krath military? We have stood against worse, Elena said quietly. I almost choked. Worse? Worse than what? Have you fought the Krath before? No. Have you ever even seen real combat? Your species has been at peace for nearly a century. You have gone soft, complacent. You negotiate with words and treaties and handshakes. I spat the last word like it was poisonous. The Krath negotiate with plasma cannons and orbital bombardment. Ambassador Vex, she said, and there was something in her tone now, something I could not quite identify. I strongly suggest you reconsider your position. We do not want conflict, but if you force our hand, you will regret it. I stared at her for a long moment. Then I threw my head back and roared with laughter. It went on for a good 20 seconds. I could not help myself. The sheer absurdity of it all. Regret it. I finally managed to gasp out between laughs. Oh, that is perfect. The human threatens me. Me, Vex Thornax, who has personally led 17 planetary invasions, who has broken siege lines that had held for decades, who has crushed opponents 3 times my size. I leaned in close enough that she could probably feel my breath hot and rank. What exactly are you going to do, little human? Negotiate me to death? File a formal complaint? Maybe you will write a strongly worded letter to the Galactic Council. I spread my arms wide in mock invitation. Please, enlighten me. How does a species that barely qualifies as a threat to their own planet plan to stand against the Krath Dominion? Elena stood up slowly, very slowly, and something in the way she moved made my secondary stomach clench. I think, she said softly, it is time for a history lesson, Ambassador. The temperature in the room had not changed. The lighting remained the same. Nothing physical had shifted. And yet somehow everything felt different. Elena walked slowly around the table, her movements deliberate, controlled. I tracked her with all 4 eyes, suddenly very aware that I had lost sight of her hands. Tell me, Ambassador, she said, her voice carrying a weight it had not held before. What do you know about Earth, our homeworld? I scoffed, though the sound came out weaker than I intended. A garden world, moderate climate, abundant resources, the kind of paradise that breeds weakness. Paradise. She actually smiled at that, but there was no humor in it, none at all. Let me correct some misconceptions you seem to be operating under. She stopped walking, standing now just 3 meters away from me, close enough that I could see the muscles in her jaw tighten as she spoke. Earth has an extinction rate of 99.9%. Do you understand what that means? It means that for every species alive on our planet today, thousands went extinct before them. Our world does not coddle life, Ambassador. It tests it, constantly, brutally, without mercy. I shifted in my chair. Many worlds have harsh evolutionary pressures. This proves nothing. Oh, I am just getting started, she said, and there was something sharp in her voice now, like a blade being slowly drawn from its sheath. Humans evolved as persistence predators. We are not the fastest, not the strongest, not the most heavily armed, but we can run for days. Days, Ambassador. We would chase prey animals until their hearts literally exploded from exhaustion. We would track them across continents, through deserts, over mountains, never stopping, never resting, until they collapsed and died. My scales rippled involuntarily. That was disturbing, but I kept my voice steady. Primitive hunting tactics, ancient history. You are right, she agreed. Let me fast forward. Humans have been fighting wars for our entire recorded history. 5,000 years of continuous uninterrupted warfare. We have killed each other with rocks, with spears, with swords, with bullets, with bombs, with poison gas, with biological weapons, with nuclear fire. We have turned the art of killing our own species into a science. She began pacing again, and I realized with growing discomfort that she was circling me. We fought a conflict we called World War I. 20 million dead in 4 years. We used chemical weapons that dissolved men's lungs while they were still breathing. We sat in trenches filled with mud and corpses and rats for months, years, shelling each other day and night, and when it was over we looked at that horror and said, well, that was terrible. Let us make sure we never do that again. Sensible, I managed to say. 20 years later, we did it again, Elena continued, her voice flat. World War II, 85 million dead. We firebombed entire cities. We built factories whose only purpose was to murder millions of people as efficiently as possible. We developed weapons that could vaporize 100,000 people in a single flash of light, and we used them. Twice. My mouth had gone dry. Those numbers, those weapons. Surely she was exaggerating. After that, she went on, we spent decades pointing enough nuclear weapons at ourselves to sterilize our entire planet 20 times over. We came within minutes, Ambassador, of ending our own species out of sheer paranoia and pride. That is insane, I said, and my voice actually cracked. Yes, she agreed simply. We are very good at insane. We have a term for it actually. Total war. Do you know what that means? I shook my head, unable to form words. It means every resource, every factory, every citizen becomes part of the war machine. Entire economies restructured overnight for a single purpose: destruction. The complete and utter annihilation of the enemy, not just their military, everything, their infrastructure, their economy, their will to fight. We do not just defeat opponents, Ambassador. When we decide to commit, we erase them. She stopped pacing and looked directly at me. And you know the truly terrifying part? We did all of this to ourselves, our own species, people who looked like us, spoke languages we could learn, shared 99.9% of our genetic code. Can you imagine what we are capable of doing to species we have no biological connection to? I could not answer. My breathing had become shallow. Fight or flight instincts I had not felt since I was a juvenile were screaming at me to run. So when you sit there, Elena said softly, dangerously, and tell me humans are soft. When you threaten our people, our colony, you should understand exactly what kind of species you are provoking. She turned away from me, walking toward a storage locker on the wall. Let me show you something, Ambassador. Something my family has kept for 7 generations. The locker opened with a soft hiss. Elena reached inside with both hands, moving with a reverence I had only seen in religious ceremonies. When she turned back around, she was holding something that made absolutely no sense. It was a weapon. Obviously a weapon, but it looked ancient, primitive. A long curved blade enclosed in a dark sheath, with intricate wrapping on what I assumed was the handle. The whole thing was maybe a meter in length, absurdly simple compared to the plasma rifles and particle beams that modern militaries used. This, Elena said, holding the weapon horizontally across both palms, is a katana, a sword. It was forged on Earth in the year 1867 by a master craftsman named Takeshi Yamamoto. It has been in my family for 258 years. I stared at it, then at her, then back at the blade. You brought a medieval weapon to a diplomatic negotiation? I asked, my voice climbing an octave higher than I intended. Have humans not invented ranged weapons yet? Or are you just particularly nostalgic for the days when you had to get close enough to smell your enemy before killing them? This blade, she continued, ignoring my attempt at mockery, was carried by my great-great-great-grandfather Kenji Torres, during a period on Earth we call the Meiji Restoration. He was a samurai. Do you know what that word means, Ambassador? I neither know nor care, I said, but my eyes would not leave the weapon. There was something about it, the way she held it, the care in her movements. Samurai were warriors, Elena explained, her voice taking on an almost ceremonial quality. But not just warriors, they lived by a code called Bushido, the way of the warrior. It governed every aspect of their lives. How they fought, how they died, how they treated honor, loyalty, duty. They trained from childhood until death in the art of combat. And this blade was their soul. She ran one hand along the sheath, not quite touching it, as if the weapon itself commanded respect. Genji carried this sword through 7 battles. He survived wounds that should have killed him 3 times. When the age of the samurai ended, when Japan modernized and warriors were no longer needed, he kept this blade. He passed it to his son, who passed it to his daughter, who passed it down through the generations until it reached me. Fascinating family history, I said, trying to inject some of my earlier confidence back into my voice. It came out shaky. But what exactly does a rusty antique have to do with our current situation? Elena looked up at me, and there was something in her eyes now, something cold and calculating. My great-grandfather Marcus Torres carried this blade during the Third Martian Rebellion. He never drew it, not once, but every soldier who saw it strapped to his side knew what it meant. It meant he came from a line of warriors who understood violence on a fundamental level. She walked closer to me, still holding the weapon with both hands. My grandfather Chen Torres kept it in his quarters during the Titan blockade. 47 days under siege. No supplies. No reinforcements. The enemy demanded surrender daily. He would sit in his command center, this blade resting on his desk, and he would refuse. Every single day. On day 48, our fleet broke through. Grandfather said this sword reminded him that surrender was never an option for those who came before him, so it could not be an option for him. I was pressed back in my chair now, and I had not even realized I was moving. This tiny human with her ancient weapon was somehow more intimidating than the hive queens I had faced down. How was that possible? My mother, Admiral Sofia Torres, wore this blade on her hip during the Proxima Accords, Elena continued. She never touched it during 6 months of negotiations, but it was always there. A reminder to everyone in the room that humans could choose diplomacy, but we never forgot how to choose war. She stopped less than 2 meters from me. You see, Ambassador, the Krath bred for combat, you were born into it, shaped by it genetically over thousands of generations. But humans, her smile was thin and cold. We choose it. Every single generation has to learn war from scratch. We are not born with claws or armored scales or bioweapons. We have to craft them, study them, master them, and because we are not naturally built for violence, we had to become very, very good at it to survive. This is just a sword, I said weakly. An old, outdated piece of metal. You are absolutely right, Elena agreed. It is outdated, impractical. In a modern space battle, it is completely useless. But I keep it. We keep it. Millions of humans across the colonies keep weapons like this. Swords, axes, spears, bows, relics from our violent past. Do you know why? I could not answer. My throat had sealed up completely. Because we never want to forget what we are capable of, she said quietly. We never want to forget that beneath the diplomacy, beneath the peace treaties and the handshakes and the carefully worded negotiations, we are a species that climbed to the top of our food chain by being the most efficient killers our planet had ever produced. Her hands moved to the handle. Would you like a demonstration, Ambassador Vex? I did not get a chance to answer. Elena drew the blade in one fluid motion, and the sound it made, that distinctive metallic whisper as steel left the sheath, went straight through my nervous system like an electrical shock. The blade caught the overhead lights, reflecting a cold gleam that seemed impossibly sharp. I threw myself backward so hard that my chair toppled over. I crashed to the floor, all pretense of dignity abandoned, scrambling away from her on my hands and knees like a hatchling fleeing a nest predator. Every instinct I had, every survival mechanism bred into me over 10,000 generations, was screaming the same message. Danger, danger, danger. Elena had not moved toward me. She stood perfectly still, the blade held at a low angle, point toward the ground. She was not even looking at me, but somehow that made it worse. She did not need to threaten. Her simple presence with that weapon was threat enough. Lights, observation mode, she said calmly. The wall panels flickered, and suddenly I realized we were not alone. The one-way mirrors lining the conference room cleared, revealing a gallery of observers, at least a dozen representatives from various species, all watching. The Selkoth ambassador, with his crystalline exoskeleton reflecting rainbow patterns, 2 Vren delegates, their tentacles writhing in agitation, even a granite folk observer, its stone-like features somehow conveying intense interest. They had been watching the entire time. My humiliation was complete. Every species in this sector had just witnessed me, Vex Thornax, legendary warrior and diplomat of the Krath Dominion, scramble away from a human half my size holding a primitive blade. Combat training dummy, standard configuration, Elena called out. A panel in the floor opened, and a humanoid target rose up. It was made of military-grade polymer, the kind used to test plasma weapons and kinetic rounds, the kind that could withstand multiple hits from standard infantry rifles. Elena walked toward it with measured steps. Her movements were strange, controlled, each footfall placed with precision, her body weight shifting in ways that looked almost like a dance. The blade remained low, unthreatening, but her grip had changed, both hands on the handle now, knuckles pale with pressure. She stopped 3 meters from the dummy. Then she moved. I have witnessed Kroth blade masters in combat. I have seen Vryn shock troops tear through reinforced bunkers. I have watched hive warriors move with speed that blurred the eye. Nothing prepared me for what I saw next. Elena crossed the distance to the dummy in less than a second. The blade swept up in an arc so fast I barely tracked it. There was no sound of impact, no crash or clang, just a whisper of metal through air. And then she was past the target. On the other side, blade held out to her side as if frozen in the follow-through. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the dummy slid apart diagonally, cut from shoulder to opposite hip. Both pieces hit the floor with heavy thuds. The cut surface was so smooth it looked polished. By the void, someone whispered in the observation gallery. I think it was the Selkoth. Elena turned, stepped. The blade moved again, this time in 3 rapid strikes that I could not even follow individually. They blurred together, a pattern of silver light in the air. She pivoted, spun, and delivered a final horizontal cut that sang through the air. The upper half of the dummy, the piece that had been severed first, suddenly collapsed into 6 perfectly even sections. She had cut it multiple times while it was falling and I had not even seen the blade touch it. My secondary heart was pounding so hard I thought it might rupture. This was not possible. The polymer those dummies were made from required industrial cutting lasers to shape, plasma torches to melt, and she had sliced through it like it was soft tissue with nothing but a length of sharpened metal and the strength in her arms. Elena walked back to where the sheath lay on the table. She raised the blade, examining it in the light. Not a scratch, not a chip, not even a smudge. Then, in a motion as smooth as the draw had been, she returned it to the sheath with a soft click. The observers in the gallery had gone completely silent. Even the Vryn had stopped moving. That blade, Elena said, her breathing barely elevated despite the explosive violence I had just witnessed, was forged using techniques that are over 1,000 years old. The steel was folded 10,000 times. The edge was sharpened and polished over weeks of painstaking work, and it has been maintained by my family for 7 generations. She turned to face me, where I still crouched on the floor like a coward. Now, Ambassador Vex, she said, her voice carrying clearly through the silent room. Would you like to continue threatening the human colony on Kepler 7, or would you prefer to negotiate like civilized beings? I could not form words. My translator was receiving the signals from my brain, but nothing coherent was coming out. She waited patiently, the sheathed blade held loosely in one hand. It took me 3 attempts to stand up. My legs kept threatening to give out. When I finally managed to get vertical, I kept a full 5 meters between myself and Elena Torres. The sheathed blade in her hand might as well have been a primed antimatter warhead for all the fear it inspired in me. I started, then had to clear my throat. I believe I may have misjudged the situation. You think? Elena asked, and there was actually amusement in her voice now, not cruel mockery, just genuine, tired amusement. She gestured to my overturned chair. Please, sit. Let us start this conversation over. I righted the chair carefully, testing its structural integrity before lowering myself into it. My claws were trembling, actual trembling. When was the last time that had happened? Not since my arena trials as a juvenile. Elena set the blade on the table between us, horizontally, the way she had held it when she first retrieved it. Even sheathed and motionless, I could not stop staring at it. You are wondering, she said, settling back into her own chair, how you got this so wrong. Yes? I nodded, not trusting my voice yet. It is a common mistake, she continued. Most species look at humans and see exactly what you saw. We are physically weak compared to most spacefaring races. We have no natural armor, no biological weapons, no redundant organ systems. We require narrow environmental parameters to survive. By most metrics, we should not be a threat to anyone. But you are. I managed to croak out. Obviously you are. We are, she agreed. But not because we are warriors by nature. The Kroth are warriors by nature. You were bred for it, shaped by it, born into it. Combat is your default state. For you, peace is the exception, the aberration. She leaned forward slightly, her expression thoughtful. Humans are the opposite, Ambassador. Our default state is cooperation, community. We are social creatures who thrive on connection and mutual support. We build societies, cultures, art, music, literature. We explore not to conquer but to understand. We negotiate because we genuinely prefer peaceful solutions. Then why? I gestured helplessly at the destroyed training dummy. Why are you so terrifyingly effective at violence? Because we have to be, she said simply. We chose peace, Ambassador Vex. We actively chose it, but we never, ever forgot that the choice exists. Every human child learns our history. They learn about the wars, the genocides, the nuclear standoffs. They learn what we are capable of when we abandon restraint, and we teach them that history not to glorify it but to make sure we never repeat it. In the observation gallery I could see the other delegates leaning in, listening intently. This was apparently news to them as well. The Krath fight because it is what you are, Elena continued. Humans fight because we choose to, and that choice, that conscious decision to unleash violence, makes us methodical, deliberate. When we go to war we do not do it in the heat of passion or instinct. We do it with cold calculation and absolute commitment. She tapped the blade sheath with one finger. This sword represents that choice. Every human who carries one, who keeps one, who maintains these ancient weapons is making a statement. We remember what we were. We acknowledge what we could be again, but we choose, every single day, to be better. The colony on Kepler 7, I said slowly, my thoughts finally starting to organize themselves. Those 3,000 humans have families, Elena finished, have children, have homes they built with their own hands. They chose to be colonists, farmers, miners, builders. They did not choose to be soldiers. But if you force that choice upon them, she shrugged. Well, we have a saying on Earth, you can take the human out of the war, but you cannot take the war out of the human. Behind the observation glass, the Selkoth ambassador activated his comlink. I could see his crystalline fingers moving rapidly. Within hours, this entire conversation would be disseminated throughout the Galactic Council. The story of Ambassador Vex, humbled by a human with an ancient blade, would spread across every civilized system. My career was finished, my reputation destroyed, and I could not bring myself to care. I was too busy being grateful that I was still alive. The Krath Dominion, I said carefully, will withdraw our claim to Kepler 7. We will recognize human sovereignty over the system and its resources. We will establish a trade agreement, fair terms, mutual benefit, all the usual diplomatic language. That sounds reasonable, Elena said, and the tension in her shoulders finally eased. We would be happy to trade with the Krath. We have always believed there is more to gain through cooperation than conquest. Yes, I agreed quickly. Cooperation. Absolutely. Much better than the alternative. She smiled then, and it was warm, genuine. The smile of someone who had gotten exactly what she wanted without having to actually hurt anyone. Terrifying. Absolutely terrifying. The renegotiation took 4 hours. 4 hours of me agreeing to almost everything Elena suggested, because every time I even thought about objecting, my eyes would drift to that blade on the table and the words would die in my throat. We established trade routes, mining rights with proper revenue sharing, cultural exchange programs, a joint security agreement that made my scales itch with irony. The Krath Dominion, offering to help protect a human colony we had threatened to obliterate just hours earlier. The other species representatives filtered into the room once the observation period ended. Every single one of them looked at Elena differently now. The Vren delegates kept a respectful distance, their tentacles curled tight against their bodies in a defensive posture. The Selkoth bowed, actually bowed, something I had never seen them do for anyone outside their own species. Even the granite folk observer, who normally showed about as much emotional range as actual granite, approached Elena with what could only be described as reverence. Captain Torres, the granite folk rumbled, its voice like continents grinding together. Your demonstration was enlightening. The Granite Collective would like to establish formal diplomatic relations with the United Earth Coalition. At your earliest convenience, of course. Of course, Elena replied graciously, as if she had not just terrorized an entire diplomatic gallery with a sword older than most of their star charts. I watched this unfold with a mixture of horror and fascination. In less than a day, I had managed to accomplish what human diplomats had been working toward for decades. I had made humanity respected, feared, taken seriously by every major power in the sector. All because I had been too arrogant to do 5 minutes of actual research. As the other delegates filed out, Elena began packing away the blade with the same careful reverence she had shown when retrieving it. I watched her hands as she secured it back in the storage locker. "Captain Torres," I said quietly, "may I ask you something?" "Of course, Ambassador." If I had not backed down, I began, then had to force myself to continue. If I had actually followed through on my threats, if the Croft had moved against Kepler-7, what would have happened? Elena paused, her hand resting on the closed locker. She was silent for a long moment. "Honestly," she finally said, "I do not know. Maybe you would have won. The Krath have superior numbers, better weapons technology, and more combat experience. On paper you should absolutely win that fight." She turned to face me and her expression was serious, sad, even. "But humans do not fight on paper, Ambassador. We fight with everything we have. Every ship, every weapon, every person willing to hold the line, and we do not stop, ever. We have a phrase, no surrender, no retreat. It is not just words, it is who we are when you push us into a corner." "Total war," I said, remembering her earlier explanation. "Total war," she confirmed. "The Krath might have taken Kepler-7, but what would it have cost you? How many ships? How many soldiers? And after Kepler-7, what about our other colonies? What about Earth itself? How long would the Krath Dominion want to fight a species that considers mutual destruction an acceptable outcome?" I felt cold, despite the climate-controlled environment. She was right. Even if we won, we would lose. We would bleed ourselves dry against an enemy that refused to stop fighting. "I need to send a message," I said, more to myself than to her, to the Dominion, to the other Krath commanders. "What will you tell them?" Elena asked. I thought about that for a moment. "How did you summarize what I had learned today? How did you explain that the soft-looking mammals were actually the most dangerous species we had encountered? Precisely because they chose not to be dangerous most of the time." "I will tell them," I said slowly, "that humans are not prey. They are not weak. They are not targets for expansion. They are a species that has spent thousands of years perfecting the art of controlled violence. And the only reason we do not see it is because they have chosen to put that violence away." "That is fair," Elena said. "I will also tell them," I continued, "that if you ever meet a human in a negotiation, and they remain calm while you threaten them, you should be very, very afraid, because that calmness is not weakness. It is control." Elena smiled at that. "You learn quickly, Ambassador Vex." "Survival instinct," I muttered. She extended her hand again, that same gesture from the beginning of our meeting. This time I took it. Her grip was firm but not crushing. The hand of someone who had nothing left to prove. "I look forward to a long and prosperous relationship between our peoples," she said formally. "As do I, Captain Torres," I replied. "As do I." I left the negotiation chamber with my dignity in tatters but my life intact. As I walked through the corridors of the station heading toward my ship, I composed the warning message in my head. "To all Krath commanders, from Ambassador Vex Thornax, regarding humanity. They carry ancient weapons to remind themselves what they are capable of. They teach their children about their capacity for violence, so they never forget the price of peace. They choose diplomacy not because they are weak, but because they are strong enough to choose. Do not mistake that choice for inability. Do not confuse their preference for peace with lack of skill in war. And whatever you do, never ever threaten them while assuming they are soft, because humans are only soft until they decide not to be, and when they make that decision, when they reach for those ancient blades they keep so carefully maintained, you will understand exactly why their species survived long enough to reach the stars. I learned that lesson today. I survived learning it. Do not assume you will be so fortunate. Vex Thornax, Ambassador, Krath Dominion, filing formal recommendation to avoid military conflict with United Earth Coalition at all costs. They are not what they seem. And that is exactly what makes them dangerous.